Thank you, everybody, for joining our webinar today. I would love to have a lot of questions today, so feel free to put questions in the chat, or we can turn on the microphones at the end. Everybody can ask whatever questions they have. And we're really excited to share this tool with everybody today. Our presenters today are Charles Collins Hooper from Rencore Governance and Arthur Hedge from Castle Ventures. I will turn it over to Arthur.
All right, thank you, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending upon where you're at. As Paul said, I'm Arthur Hedge. I'm the president of Castle Ventures Corporation. We are a cybersecurity consulting firm located in the New York area. One of the things that's happened over the past 2 years is the increased use of web-based applications. And I think there was already the progression for people to move things into the cloud, but the pandemic has accelerated that movement by many organizations. And a big beneficiary of that has been the Microsoft Teams environment, in that literally hundreds of millions of people are using Microsoft Teams to collaborate, share information, store their information, manage their information in ways that they never really planned on when they started this 2 years ago. And to Microsoft's great credit, they have developed a number of applications, in the tens of applications in the Microsoft 365 platform, that are integrated, that are accessible to the user community, and really allow for powerful collaboration across an organization and sometimes across different organizations. There are several challenges with this from a data governance perspective. And that's why we've partnered with Rencore to help people manage that sprawl. I think that a couple of things that we face. One, Microsoft continues to develop new solutions and roll those out to the user community. Two, it is a tool designed for collaboration and to make things as easy to use for the user community as possible. It is not designed to make the IT professional's life easier or the IT security person's life easier. It's designed to make the end user's life easier. And because of that, it introduces lots of risks to an organization, in that out of the box, users can share information essentially with anyone on the planet. And it's very difficult to control that, and they can build sites and teams. And with that, there is certainly business benefit to the organization, and that people can work together easier. However, there's a big trade-off in that it is much harder to manage, and it introduces a lot of security holes, and it also introduces potential long-term costs to the organization from a storage and licensing perspective that are difficult to manage. So as we've dealt with our clients, people have brought some of these concerns to us, and somebody whispered in my ear Rencore as a potential solution, and that's why we've partnered with Rencore to deliver governance of the Microsoft 365 environment to our customer base. And we think it's a very exciting new solution. I think one of the things that's just from a philosophical perspective that I really like about Rencore is they're upfront about what their roadmap is, so we can see what they have today and what they're going to have tomorrow and what they're going to have a year from now. So it's a very exciting organization to work with. They've come up with some cool solutions, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Charles so that he can walk you through the Rencore governance solution. So with that, thank you, Charles, and take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Arthur, for setting the stage there. Before I dive right into the into the demo part of it. Maybe I'll just spend not too long, a couple of minutes, just expanding a little bit on what a lot of the challenges that Arthur touched upon there. And one of the things that we've actually done recently, and this was just for market research, is that we started having interviews with some of our current Rencore Governance customers, just for the purpose mainly of finding out what the driving factors were for them basically procuring Rencore Governance. And it was interesting to note through this some of the reoccurring themes that came up over and over again. And one of them, which I would say 80% of the clients mentioned right up from the front, was basically visibility. They had no clear overview previously of what was happening in their tenant. It was hard to make educated decisions. They would have random incidents that occurred, for instance, finding a user that has external sharing enabled when they should have been locked down. And this actually happened with one particular client who was very sensitive about their data. Everything should have been locked down. And they ran Rencore Governance during a trial, and they discovered that stuff was being shared externally. And basically, it was the global admins that were sharing stuff externally. So that was kind of the strong force in which they said, okay, we have to get a tool such as Rencore Governance into. Another thing that some of the organizations kind of brought up over again, it was, well, it kind of creates a platform to just get the dialogue started. We can come together at the table, we can look at the data which is on the tenant, and then they decide from there what the strategy is going to be for all. And whether you're sitting together at a table or the way some other organizations have kind of done it, which is basically maybe it starts with the IT admin going through the data, and then they say, oh, well, this is going to be interesting for the security guys to look at the external access here, or multi-factor authentication here, and then it's going to be interesting for the procurement guys. Let's bring those guys in because they want to look at the status of the licenses to make sure that licensing is optimized and you're not driving up costs here. And the other thing that people mentioned with the Rencore Governance tool was basically the flexibility which is within the tool. We cover more services than a lot of the competitors are out there. So, even if you're an organization that is only interested in using Exchange Online or Teams, we have you covered for your current needs. And for instance, in the future, if you decide to broaden the scope and you open up your Power Platform, we've got you covered within that. And again, Rencore Governance provides you with the flexibility to crunch the data, to be able to create checks that get relevant data to what it is you're looking for, whereas some other tools on the market have these very rigid reports that actually prevent you from getting the answers that you need. And with that said, I'd like to just draw your attention to the tool that I've opened up here, and it's on this dashboard page. I'll just scroll through it. This is like your cockpit. It gives you the quick start of what it is that's happening within your tenant. So you've got the Power Apps inventory, the actual inventory in total, so how many users in total on your tenant, the licenses. You can have a look at this, what's happening with your Microsoft 365 checks. So we do governance for Power Apps, Office 365 groups, Power Automate. We do Teams governance. We do Sharepoint governance. We do OneDrive governance, we do Power Apps governance, and we do a couple which are missing there, which is, actually, let me just switch this to another tenant because that will actually bring it up. This is a slightly old one. If I go to that one, just give me 2 seconds. We do Yammer and Exchange as well. There we go. That's a new one. Okay. So just to tell you, we do Yammer and Exchange as well. So as Arthur was saying, we're very transparent about what it is that we're doing and the direction which the tool is going to be heading in. We've got a published roadmap there, and as you can tell, there are a couple of Microsoft services that are missing. beyond the ones which are on here, Azure Active Directory, Yammer, for instance. But we've got a published roadmap on where we tell you what's coming up next. So some of the ones which are still missing there, for instance, are going to be Azure and Power BI. But those are on the roadmap and they're planned for the first quarter of next year. Our ambition is to be the go-to tool when it comes to Microsoft 365 governance. And there are other things which are on the roadmap, which a lot of people, particularly security focused people, would be find particularly useful. For instance, in the next quarter, there's the permissions report, which will be coming out as well, and so on and so forth. So we've got this roadmap, which Castle Ventures can make available to you guys if you want to know what is planned or what is already in development and what is coming, as Arthur said right there. So back to this dashboards overview that we were here. So we've got dashboards for the particular checks that you could be looking at. So if you're an organization and you want to know, for instance, what's happening within your Teams dashboard, you could just easily share the Teams dashboard. If you're the Teams admin, if you want to know what's happening within SharePoint, you could share the SharePoint dashboard. These are just all the services. Microsoft 365, Teams, Power Automate, Power Apps, SharePoint, OneDrive. Then we've got some default dashboards which are built here, which could be relevant. So for instance, if you want to know what's happening in the security of your tenant, we have a security dashboard. And then for instance, we have an external access dashboard. This also can have implications on security, but we put it as a separate dashboard, external access dashboard, to get a better understanding and peace of mind of who your guests are in your tenant, because a lot of organizations need external guests for collaboration purposes, for projects, so on and so forth, but then have a hard time figuring out when they can revoke access again. So we give you a lot of signals around that with this report. So if I go to external access, you'll see all the external access checks which are built into here. External users with pending acceptance, external users, groups with external users, so forth. Another dashboard that we have, for instance, is costs dashboard. And this is, again, is for cost management. For instance, Microsoft licenses that are still assigned to disabled users, for instance, and something also that happens frequently is double licensing. So somebody has an E3 and an E5 license, or licenses assigned to mailboxes, for instance. And another thing we can look at is, licenses that are requiring a premium license, long-running flows, that's going to drive up your costs as well. Large OneDrive sites. So the one that I already mentioned, disabled user accounts with assigned licenses. And then going back to the dashboards, we've got all of these user offboarding, for instance, dashboard. If somebody's leaving the organization, you want to know what resources they had, if they had any flows that are going to break, if they, for instance, were the owners of any teams, what licenses they had, so that person can have a smoother transition as possible when they're leaving the organization. We'll come back to dashboards in a second, just to have a look at how they can be used for reporting purposes. But let's go to the main part of this tool, which is the checks part of it. I'm going to jump straight to checks. Now we've used the word checks here at Rencore. Some companies would choose to use the word policies. Other companies, for instance, would choose to use the word rules. It doesn't matter whatever lingo you're going up for. It's all more or less the same thing. And one of the things I think that we have a problem with is the terminology of governance itself. There are a lot of organizations out there that are, throwing the term governance around, GRC in particular, governance, risk, and compliance. And whenever I'm speaking to these organizations, it's very clear to me that they can pinpoint exactly what they mean by risk and what they mean by compliance. But when it comes to governance, you get all sorts of stories there. On the one end of the scale, you get the organizations that are saying, well, my idea of governance is that I want to run, for instance, evergreen IT, where my users are always on the latest and the greatest, and I've opened everything up and I've encouraged adoption. However, I want to I don't want to have a complete Wild West happening on my tenant. I want to still stay in control and have an overview into what's going on. And then you speak to somebody else and you're like, well, what's your idea of governance? So they're like, I have a zero trust policy. I have very sensitive data. I cannot risk external or internal people, ruining that. So I am locked down. I don't allow any external sharing. And for that reason, I've taken this very strong standpoint that I need to have this kind of very strong overview in what's happening with my tenant. So you get these different situations and people's interpretations of governance. And so what Rencore Governance is supposed to do is, regardless of whatever services you're using, Teams, SharePoint, OneDrive, Yammer, Exchange Online, regardless of what your strategy is when you're talking about governance, what our aim is here is to help you implement that strategy. So we've got these checks. So how would you use the Rencore Governance to implement your first governance check? You could simply go to add check, and that would take you to the checks template library. And if I look at the checks here, we've got your Office 365 groups, disabled rooms place accounts, disabled user accounts, external users with pending acceptance, so on and so forth. We've got a library of checks here, and these checks, we don't just try and dictate what people wanted and we put them into this library. We actually did our research. We gave the tool out to people before we actually launched it and said, hey, use this tool and come back to us with checks that you want to see implemented in this library. So we took those ideas, we sifted through them, the ones that were most frequently requested, we put in here, the ones that made the most sense. We also put into this library, and the idea behind this library is that it's going to stay relevant. As we see the way in which people are doing governance, we still are consistently taking feedback. As you can see here, there's a giant feedback button there. But nevertheless, we've got this library here for people to have a look at. External users, global administrators without MFA, that's going to have a heavy impact on security. It could be that you want to look at global administrators without MFA, or everybody across the organization that doesn't have MFA enabled. Groups with very few owners, new teams, for instance. So we give you an idea on why you could be looking at that. That could be adoption, inactive teams, that's deprecation. And then if you're looking at teams that are reaching the limits, those are kind of avoiding the sprawl that can happen with your environment, which can impact business continuity when people just can't make sense of what's within teams, can't find what they're looking for within teams. And again, teams with less than 2 owners, that's Microsoft's best practices and avoiding that declutter that can happen. Complex flows. Flows not with specific service accounts, flows requiring a premium license, that's going to have impact on costs, flows that use a specific connector, flows with errors. And so we've got this library in there to give you basically a quick start and to have a dialogue, as I said in the beginning, with the required people within your organization saying, well, hey, in procurement, these things are going to have implications on costs. Hey, security, MFA and external sharing, those are things you got to have a look at here within your tenant. The idea behind this library is to give you a quick start to that. So you can just have a look at these checks which are in here. But the checks which are in here are filled with default data through the research that we've done. You can always go in there and adjust these checks to the way that you want them to be. So for instance, complex flows, we've defined that as a flow that has 20 or more actions to it. You could think, well, that's nothing for our organization. Let's drive that number up, and you could, change it as you want to 40 flows or whatever it is that, 40 actions or whatever it is that you think defines a complex flow. So you can take what's in the library and adjust it to your own specific needs. So we've got Power Apps, we've got SharePoint checks here, classic sites, externally shared files, SharePoint extranet sites, a popular one, unused sites. Again, you can dive into there. Just give you that quick start. You can see, okay, it's the default is set to 90 days. Okay, maybe I sit down with my organization and we're like, well, no, let's flag it unused sites after a period of 180 days. You can simply change that to 180 days. Click next. You need to give it a unique kind of number there, a unique name because the default has been taken. Change it to 180 days, And then what category is it? Is it declutter, deprecation? It's going to remain as declutter. And why are you looking at this? Is it of low, medium, high? And you can change it maybe because you're waiting for 180 days. It's of low severity for you guys. You can save and enable it. And you've built your own unique check by taking what was in the library and adjusting it to your own specific needs there. So 2 ways so far that I've told you in which you can use this checks template library. And as I said in the beginning, we aim to be as flexible as possible, just to give you the information that you really need. So use the default data because maybe that's suitable for your organization that is within the library, or take what's in the library and adjust it to your own specific needs. Or another way that you could do it would be to create your own custom check from scratch. And you could go to create custom check. And one of the things that I was mentioning, and I know this isn't in the library for some reason, during the costs was the double licensing. So now you want to create a check which is basically avoiding double licensing in your tenant. How would you do that? So you want to report a violation for every user. And then from that, you want to add a related object to that user. This is quite a simple check to build. So you want to know that that user basically doesn't have more than one, and you'd simply go to license. And you could build that checkout, and that would pull out all your users basically that have more than one license. So you know that that double licensing isn't happening. That happens more often than you think, isn't happening within your tenant and driving up costs. So that's one way. I mean, we can look at a slightly more complex one, which I saw in using the filters here, just to give you an idea of the logic and the way in which you can build these checks. For instance, if you want to look, for instance, at a power apps that have a disabled user. So you want to pull out all that information, power apps that have a disabled user. So you'd simply build out that check by going to power apps. And then from there, you'd add a related object. And what is it you want to know? You want to know any user for that power app. And then you want to add a filter. You want to know information about the users because you want to know that that user is not active. And you'd simply go to, where is it? It's there, it's the very top one. Account enabled is false. So that's the logic. It takes a bit of getting used to, but the reason I'm showing you this is that it's flexible. You can get the information that you want from your tenant, and you can think of it, and then you can put it into this check builder to pull out that information, which is all very well and good. And within this demo data that I'm running, you can see some of the checks which are running here: unused sites, disabled owners, teams with very few owners, for instance. And you can drill into that. So going into global engineering, for instance. And once that loads up, and you can see global engineering, you can see, for instance, the properties for global engineering, which could be useful. For instance, last message posted could be useful information for you to build checks upon. For instance, create a date. Maybe you want to build checks upon some of the information which is here within the properties. You can see the related objects here, the groups, the members, owners, sensitivity label, and the checks here, for instance. So the checks that global engineering has passed and the checks that global engineering has failed. So I'm in that teams with very few owners. As I said, good data to have, but the next thing would be if you could actually do something with this data that we're now pulling out for you. And that would be the next step, which is automation. Just give you an idea on that first part in checks. I mean, we saw companies trying to achieve this in a variety of different ways. But one of the problems with Microsoft 365 is that it's very siloed. And what I mean by that is that these are all great tools which exist within the Microsoft toolbox. You've got your Teams, you've got your SharePoint, you've got your OneDrive, your Power Platform, and so on. But they're still very much siloed. So if you want to know what's happening in Teams, for instance, you have to go to the Teams Admin Center and try and figure it out that way. If you want to know what's happening in SharePoint, you have to go to that environment and figure out what's happening there, and so on and so forth. But what's actually required here is a more integrated view a way of gaining insights, for instance, into what is happening in combination with your Azure Active Directory, for instance, across the tenant. And that's what Rencore Governance allows you to do, this kind of all-in-one platform. Anyway, back to where we were here, which is adding the automation. You can simply go to add automation, and that would take you to this automation builder. So every time that that particular check is violated, what is it that you want to happen? So I came off the check teams with very few owners, and it's on check violation. On check violation means that every time a scan is run and we come across that violation, it will trigger whatever you're about to build here. But it doesn't have to be, it can be on schedule, for instance, where you're choosing, okay, I want all my automations to run on a Thursday afternoon. And when that scan is performed, you know, even if it's on a Tuesday, it won't trigger the automation until on a Thursday afternoon. But on check violation, it means that every time the scan is performed. And then you click next and you're choosing what should be happening. And so you can add the action. First action, maybe you're sending an email to that, and it's going to the team's owner. You're using this dynamic data to bring in the details here, and you're going to the user email. And hey, by the way, you've got this team, blah, 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 what can be done with it. But as we know, people ignore emails all the time. So maybe you want to increase, you know, the aggressiveness of your approach into these violations that are happening. So maybe you want to add a step, and then in that next step, after delay of 2 weeks, maybe to begin with, not 2 months, that's a bit much, 2 weeks. You add another action, and that could be maybe this time you're sending a message to a Teams channel, and then that would be sending the message to the Teams channel. And then the final action would be that you're taking a little bit more of an affirmative approach. So for instance, you're triggering a webhook, for instance, to revoke access, to archive, so on and so forth. There will be a lot more in automations coming, and we're consistently adding to that. We want to build it out as it was in the checks builder. If I just leave this, I'll show you what I mean by that. So if I exit that, and I go to add automation again, you can see here that we've got this library. It is still very in its infancy, but we are going to build it out. So you can see some of the ones that are running here. Disable inactive external user accounts. You could just choose that one and use it, for instance. Archive unused teams, mark teams with external users, set teams to private by default, remind OneDrive owners of externally shared files, warn OneDrive owners if their OneDrive reaches storage limit. And we're going to increase that library so you have a lot more actions that you can choose from without having to revert to building out your own automation in that case. And I'll just look at one of these actions, for instance, set teams to private by default. So you can see that it's already been built out for you. You can just choose it and you can use it. So here it is, it's on check violation. So every time the scan is run, it's for public teams. And here you can see the action basically that is being taken with that. So here it is, it's for the Teams group, parent ID. So visibility is private. It's sending an email saying, dear so-and-so, you're an owner of a Microsoft Teams. The visibility of this team is currently set to public, and we're going to make it private. So a lot more to come with the automations, and that is on our roadmap as well, as I said, which we publish and consistently update on a weekly basis as we see we're approaching if there's a realistic possibility of releasing the next thing on the roadmap. And then finally, coming back to dashboards. As I said, these can be used for reporting purposes, and I went through some of the ones which are there. If people want to know what's happening with external access management, with costs, etc., you can just share these dashboards. If the Teams admin wants to know that, you can share the Teams dashboard. But you can also create unique dashboards here, where you're going to a blank dashboard, and maybe this is for you know, the management, and you're creating a management dashboard here. You give it that you're creating, and you save, and now you've created a blank dashboard, and you want to add it with things that management could be interested in receiving a report on, perhaps. If they want to know about the state of their licenses, you could add that one to the management dashboard you've just created. If they want to know groups with very few owners, you could add that to the management dashboard you've just created, randomly clicking here, but you get the idea. You're creating a unique management dashboard, which are not in the default Rencore ones that we offer. And if I go to the overview there, you can see the management dashboard. And then if you wanted, for instance, to provide that as a report, you could share this dashboard. Maybe it's a reoccurring email, fill out who it's going to, whether it's weekly, daily, and you can attach the full PDF report to that. And you could set that up, for instance, for reporting purposes. And then finally, there is this concept of role management, which could be important for some of you guys, for whatever reason that may be. It could be that you have external organizations that come and work for you, and you want to give them access to Rencore Governance. Or it could be that you're quite a large organization and you've got a lot of data there, and your team's admin, you don't want to overwhelm them with everything that's going there. You just want to give them access to Teams, for instance, or you just want to give somebody access to SharePoint. And I'll just show you quickly how that role management concept works. So go to users and roles here, and you can invite users to Rencore Governance, and you can select the role that they have: owner, reader, admin, contributor, and you can select what it is, which services they have the ability to view. But you can get even more granular than that and go to specific roles. Let's get there. Reload that. Go to specific roles, and you're adding a role here. So maybe it's for external guy who's come in to do some work for you. You really think it's great if they have a look at what's happening on your tenant, but you want to really give them access to certain things and not others. So what should they do within the dashboard? For instance, you want them to create new dashboards for you, read and edit the existing ones. But no, you don't want them to delete anything and checks. What should they do there? Yes, you want them to create checks and read checks, but again, maybe not deleting. So you can choose specifically the role that you're dictating here for that specific user that you're going to be inviting to Rencore Governance. And the final part, which I didn't really go over, but it is quite self-explanatory, is the inventory. It's kind of that thing that I was mentioning, that Microsoft is so siloed. You need to visit about 14 admin centers, write PowerShell scripts, and putting it into Excel. Here we just have all that data right here, right in the inventory. The one thing that you can do is to make sense of this inventory data a little bit better is to add segments. So for instance, you can add segments there. So if you want to know, for instance, what's happening in the users, you could go there and you want to add the related object. So the user, for instance, no, not related object, add a filter. If you want to know, for instance, that user is external, you can add that, and that will bring out the external users. So add segments to it to make a little bit more sense of this. So for instance, if you look at the users there, you can see the external users of those 298. And I'll go through it now because there may be some things there that I didn't mention that could be quite important. But yeah, it's the inventory data. And if I go, for instance, that's one thing I didn't go through in much detail, which is user registration credentials. So as I mentioned, you want to know perhaps who's got MFA enabled and who doesn't, and that's where you can look at it here in your user registration credentials. So I go into honest, you can see here all the properties. So this is just demo data, but all of them are registering as false at the moment. Is registered false, is enabled is false. So that's the inventory, which again, it is self-explanatory, but it's just the list here. You can make sense out of it with your segments there. So that brings me to the end of the overview of Rencore Governance, and hopefully you're able to get a good insight into what it can do, and the flexibility and just the vastness of Rencore Governance. But that vastness, as I said, is not something that should scare you or you should shy away from. We've made it that way so that when people are talking about governance, we've got that covered. I was recently at the European Collaboration Summit, and it was clear to me that governance is a huge topic. You had so many sponsors who were there, who were discussing governance, but they were Power Platform governance, or they were talking about, I don't know, such and such governance, but it was good to see that, because from all the people that were there, we kind of had the most complete tool that covered most of the services that were there. But yeah, that's the demo. Any questions, feel free to ask, and I'll hand it over to Arthur to have final words, or to indeed bring up any of the questions.
Thank you, Charles. Paul, do we have any?
Yeah, if anybody has any questions, go ahead and put them in the questions box. We'll address them. We do have some good questions already. And thank you, Charles. It's impressive how vast and dynamic the tool is, and appreciate you showing us that today. First question, what support do you have for Exchange Online rules?
Exchange Online was one of the ones which was added very recently, and I think the release for this actually was last week. So it's one of the newer services that we've come on, and I'm still getting used to it. And there is a lot more before the closing of actually this year. There is going to be a lot more which is added to Exchange Online. But if I'm looking at Exchange Online at the moment, we currently only have user mailboxes and message redirect rules. So if I look in,
well, I think that's what they were looking for, Charles, the redirect rules, right? Because
the redirect rules.
Yes,
okay.
Because what people are worried about is, if I take over your mailbox, the first thing I'll do is I'll create a rule that will forward the mail somewhere else. So the answer is yes, you have it.
Yes, we do, and that's also I know the checks is kind of quite vast, but I think it should be one of the checks which are within here anyway. Where is it? Anyway, but yes, we do have it. Yeah, that's that question. Yes.
And I said, I see another question: is this a DLP solution? The answer is no, right? This is not designed to block anyone from doing anything. It is a solution really to manage the infrastructure and the rules associated with it, but it's not examining content and stopping it from going outside the organization. Another question. Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Where does the product run?
So there's two versions of it. So our preferred way is the SaaS. We market ourselves as a SaaS solution, and it's running basically in Rencore's Azure subscription. And we've got 2 data centers currently, one which is located here in Europe, the North European data center, and then we've got the one which is located in America, the Central American data center, which is in Iowa. So we've got those 2 data centers, but we're going to be opening up data centers as we see there's a market pull and demand wherever that may be. We'll open up further data centers, and we do also offer a self-hosted version of the Rencore governance tool, and you can install that in your own Azure subscription, for instance.
Okay. Couple more questions. How granular does the Power BI inventory go? Can you see what connector connections are, and can you assign ownership to a connector or environment?
I don't. I'm not my specialty. I don't think that it would go that granular, just off the top of my head. But it's something that I would have to look into with somebody here at Rencore, just to come back to you on that question.
Yeah, I don't know that one either.
Yeah. Sorry, not my specialty. But we can. Why don't we do this? We can make a note of the questions which I can't answer here, and then if you follow up afterwards with an email to any of these questions there, that'll be perfect.
Excellent. Very good question. In the checks targeting external sharing, is that just external to the tenant, or would it also see if something is shared externally from the team/SharePoint site members?
I think the best way to do that is perhaps to go to the dashboard and go to the external management, so external access, so you can see some of the things that are being shared here. So teams with external users, for instance, teams with inactive external users, SharePoint extranet sites, SharePoint files shared with inactive external users, OneDrive files shared with external users. So I think to answer that question was if I believe the answer is yes, it does, by looking at some of these checks which are within the external access. Is that what Arthur, your understanding of the question was?
No, I think they
No,
mean like,
yeah.
hey, I have 3 people that are in my team.
I
And,
see, right.
and one of the team
Mm-hmm.
members shares a file with somebody outside the team.
Mm-hmm.
And do we do that? So I am going to take a look at that. I think the answer to this question is yes.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to verify it. So let's go on to the next question, and then
Mhm.
hopefully I can get that by the time.
Another very good question. This next one you touched upon. Can you export information from the tool?
Yes, you can. So you can export, yes, you can export, for instance, if you're I'm not, when you say information, it could be a range of things. So if you're creating checks, for instance, maybe you've created a unique check, you want to export that and re-import it somewhere else, you can do that. But also in the inventory as well, for instance, the data, if I just go to that, for instance, and I go export there, and then that'll export everything which is there within users. So yes, you can export there.
Excellent. Okay, that is all the questions I see, unless anybody has any others. Great questions. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks.
Whoops. Yeah, I think in terms of the link to the Teams link, I believe the answer is it will show you that someone's created a link to that item. And then from there, you can see where it's been shared. So I think the answer is yes. But I will verify that as well.
Okay, another question we will verify, but yes, we will answer these questions.
Did we answer the EU question? Oh, if it's run in Europe, what EU privacy rules are in effect? Well, that's up to you. I mean, you can host this, right? The countries, right? You have a data center in Germany, correct?
No, actually, it's the data center is in the Netherlands. But as I said, Arthur, we may open up, for instance, another one in Germany. We've got some potential clients here who may just want that for some reason or the other. But here's the thing: we know we're going to have to cross that bridge of opening up data centers in other regions, but we're not going to try and predict where we should do it unless we have that drive there. So if there's a specific customer, that's all it takes in a certain location, and they say, hey, we really need the data center to be here for whatever reason, and we don't want to self-host, we want to keep it as a SaaS, but the data center needs to be here. Then we will jump on it and do it, basically.
Yeah, but I think the other answer is if a company had specific privacy requirements, they can always self-host the data so that it's not subject to any of these issues.
We are, and in terms of the EU, I mean, we are GDPR compliant, and we are going to get SOC 2 Type 2 certification beginning of next year. It is quite, just to tell people there, it is quite a new tool out there on the market. We only launched in February, and to get all these certifications sometimes takes a while to do that. But these are coming into place, and the first one is a SOC 2 Type 2, which is coming in February. But any concerns around that is why we offer, for instance, hosted in your own environment.
Excellent. Last call for questions. All right. Well, I hope this was valuable to everybody. you have any questions in the future, feel free to reach out to us. We'd be happy to address them.
And we
Excellent.
will be sending out a recording of this. So
Yes. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Have a great day.